The sound of gunshots echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek, causing Kathleen Kennedy to press herself against the wall of the general store, her heart pounding like a war drum. It was 1873, and the West was still wild, too wild for a woman who had grown up in the refined salons of Boston, where the only danger had been the occasional sharp critique of her piano playing. Kathleen's journey to Silver Creek, Wyoming Territory, had been born of necessity rather than choice. After her father's banking business collapsed and his subsequent death from heart failure, she had found herself alone, penniless, and with nowhere to turn. The letter from her distant cousin offering her a position as a schoolteacher in Silver Creek had seemed like salvation. Now, with bullets flying outside the general store where she had been purchasing supplies, it felt more like damnation. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it had started. Kathleen peered cautiously through the grimy window. A man lay sprawled in the dirt road, his blood staining the dust crimson. Another man stood over him, revolver still smoking in his hand. She gasped and stepped back, bumping into a shelf. Several cans of peaches crashed to the floor, the noise startling in the sudden silence. The store owner, Mr. Peterson, a portly man with a bushy mustache, hurried to her side. "Best stay inside, Miss Kennedy. That's Grant Landry out there, notorious bounty hunter, mean as a rattler but fair in his way. He's been tracking that rustler for weeks." Kathleen nodded, unable to tear her eyes away from the scene outside. Grant Landry holstered his weapon with practiced ease, then crouched beside the fallen man, checking for signs of life. Finding none, he straightened and glanced toward the general store. For a brief moment, their eyes met through the window, and Kathleen felt a jolt of something unfamiliar race through her body. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders tapering to narrow hips. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the strong line of his jaw, covered in dark stubble. There was something dangerous yet compelling about him, like a lightning storm viewed from a safe distance. Kathleen quickly stepped back from the window, drawing the small curtain across it with trembling fingers. She had no desire to attract the attention of a man who killed so casually, no matter how her pulse had quickened at the sight of him. "You can come out now, miss," Mr. Peterson said gently. "Sheriff's arrived to take care of things." "I think I'll wait a bit longer," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is there a back exit I might use?" Mr. Peterson nodded sympathetically. "Through the storeroom." "I'll have my boy carry your purchases to the schoolhouse later." Kathleen thanked him and slipped out the back way, hurrying down the alley behind the main street. She kept to the shadows, not wanting to encounter the bounty hunter again. By the time she reached the small clapboard building that served as both school and her living quarters, she was breathless and disheveled. Inside, she leaned against the door, trying to calm her racing heart. This was her 4th week in Silver Creek, and she was still struggling to adjust to the harsh realities of frontier life. Back east, she had never witnessed violence, never seen a man killed before her eyes. Here, it seemed to be an everyday occurrence. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with no hint of the previous day's violence. Kathleen rose early, as was her habit, to prepare the schoolroom before her students arrived. The school board had provided her with basic necessities: a desk, benches, a blackboard, and a handful of books, but she supplemented these with decorations and materials she made herself. She was hanging a new map of the United States when the door creaked open behind her. Expecting one of her students, she turned with a welcoming smile that froze on her face when she saw Grant Landry standing in the doorway. He removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Miss Kennedy," he said, his voice deep and resonant. Kathleen's hand flew to her throat. "How do you know my name, small town?" He shrugged, those broad shoulders moving beneath his worn leather coat. "Word gets around." She took an involuntary step backward. "What do you want?" To apologize. He remained by the door as if sensing her fear. "I saw your face yesterday in the store window. Didn't mean to frighten you." Kathleen struggled to find words. He seemed different today, less menacing, more human. "You killed that man," she finally managed. "He killed 3 others," Landry replied quietly, "including a woman and her child. Had a bounty on his head. I was just doing my job." The simplicity of his explanation stunned her. This was the reality of the West, justice delivered swiftly and finally, with no judges or juries to deliberate. It was barbaric to her Eastern sensibilities, yet she couldn't deny the logic of it in a land where law was still being established. "I see," she said, though she wasn't sure she did. "Thank you for your apology, Mr. Landry. Now, if you'll excuse me, my students will be arriving soon." He nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "Just wanted to clear the air. Don't like the idea of the schoolteacher being afraid to walk down Main Street because of me." As he turned to leave, Kathleen called out, "Do you make a habit of frightening schoolteachers, Mr. Landry?" A smile touched his lips, transforming his stern features. "No, madam, first time for everything." With that, he was gone, leaving Kathleen to ponder the enigma that was Grant Landry. She had little time for contemplation, however, as the first of her students began to arrive, bringing with them the chaos and energy of youth. The school day passed in a blur of reading lessons, arithmetic, and geography. Kathleen loved teaching, loved seeing the light of understanding dawn in a child's eyes. Even the roughest of her pupils, the sons and daughters of miners, ranchers, and shopkeepers, responded to her gentle but firm approach. As the last student departed for the day, Kathleen began tidying up, her mind drifting back to her encounter with the bounty hunter. There was something about him that intrigued her, despite the danger he represented. Perhaps it was the contradiction between his deadly profession and the courtesy he had shown her. She was erasing the blackboard when a shadow fell across the doorway again. Her heart leapt to her throat, but it was only Sheriff Taylor, a grizzled man in his 50s with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression. "Evening, Miss Kennedy," he said, twisting his hat in his hands. "Just checking in. Heard Landry paid you a visit this morning." "News travels fast," she observed, setting down the eraser. "Like I said, small town." The sheriff smiled apologetically. "Wanted to make sure you were all right. Landry's not a bad sort for a bounty hunter, but he's dangerous company all the same." "I'm fine, Sheriff. He was quite civil." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you know him well?" "Known him about 5 years now. He drifts in and out tracking wanted men, good at his job, too good, some might say." "Has he always been a bounty hunter?" Sheriff Taylor shook his head. "From what I gather, he was a cavalry officer during the war. After that, don't rightly know. He keeps to himself mostly." Kathleen nodded, filing away this information. "Thank you for checking on me, Sheriff. I appreciate it." After the sheriff left, Kathleen finished her cleaning and retired to her small living quarters at the back of the schoolhouse. It was a simple arrangement, one room with a bed, a small stove, a table, and a chair. A curtain sectioned off a washing area for privacy. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean and warm, and it was hers. She prepared a simple meal of bread and cheese, her mind still occupied with thoughts of Grant Landry. What had led a cavalry officer to become a bounty hunter? What kind of man could kill so dispassionately yet apologize so sincerely for frightening her? The next few days passed without incident. Kathleen saw no sign of Landry, and she began to think he had moved on, following whatever trail of lawlessness led to his next bounty. She found herself oddly disappointed by this prospect, which troubled her. She had no business being curious about a man like him. On Saturday, with no school to teach, Kathleen decided to visit the town's small library, housed in a corner of the mayor's office. As she walked down Main Street, she was acutely aware of the curious glances directed her way. Being the new schoolteacher made her an object of interest in Silver Creek, especially as an unmarried woman from the East. She had nearly reached the mayor's office when she heard shouting from the saloon across the street. The batwing doors burst open, and two men staggered out, locked in a violent struggle. One of them broke free long enough to draw a knife, its blade glinting in the afternoon sun. Kathleen froze, unsure whether to run or seek cover. Before she could decide, a familiar figure stepped between her and the fighting men. Grant Landry, his back to her, called out in a commanding voice, "That's enough, boys." The men paused, recognizing Landry even in their drunken state. The one with the knife hesitated, then lunged forward anyway. Landry moved with startling speed, disarming the man with a twist of his wrist and sending him sprawling in the dust. "I said enough," Landry repeated, quieter this time but somehow more menacing. The two men scrambled to their feet, mumbling apologies and accusations in equal measure as they retreated back into the saloon. Landry turned to Kathleen, his expression unreadable. "You all right, Miss Kennedy?" She nodded, trying to steady her breathing. "Yes, thank you." "I seem to have a knack for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe I have a knack for being in the right place when you need help," he replied, the hint of a smile softening his features. The comment caught her off guard, and she felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "Perhaps. Either way, I'm grateful." He glanced at the book she was clutching to her chest. "Heading to the library?" "Yes, I've read through most of my own books, and the children need new stories for reading practice. Mind if I walk with you? Seems like trouble's brewing today." She hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd appreciate that." They walked side by side down the boardwalk, an unlikely pair, the refined schoolteacher and the rugged bounty hunter. Kathleen was conscious of the stares they attracted, but found she didn't care as much as she might have expected. "How are you finding Silver Creek?" Landry asked, breaking the silence between them. "It's different from Boston," she admitted. "But the children are eager to learn, and the people have been kind for the most part." "For the most part," he echoed, raising an eyebrow. Kathleen sighed. "Some of the town's ladies seem to think I'm too young or too Eastern to be teaching their children, and some of the men," she trailed off, uncomfortable, "have been too forward." Landry finished for her. She nodded. "I've declined 3 marriage proposals already, from men I've barely exchanged 2 words with." He chuckled, a warm sound that surprised her. "Can't blame them for trying. Eligible women are scarce out here." "I didn't come west to find a husband," she said firmly. "I came to teach." They reached the mayor's office, and Landry held the door open for her. "A noble calling," he said, with no trace of mockery. "I'll wait out here if that's all right. Give the mayor a conniption if I set foot in his office. We've had our differences." Kathleen couldn't help but smile at that. "I won't be long." Inside, she selected several books suitable for her students, along with a novel for herself, Wuthering Heights, which she had read before but longed to revisit. When she emerged, Landry was leaning against a post, watching the street with alert eyes. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked, straightening as she approached. "Yes, thank you." She hesitated, then added, "I was planning to have lunch at the hotel restaurant. Would you care to join me?" The invitation surprised them both, judging by the widening of his eyes. For a moment she thought he might refuse, but then he nodded. "I'd be honored, Miss Kennedy." The hotel restaurant was nearly empty when they entered, the lunch hour having passed. The proprietress, Mrs. Henson, greeted Kathleen warmly but eyed Landry with suspicion. Nevertheless, she seated them at a corner table and took their orders stew and biscuits for both. "You don't have to do this," Landry said once they were alone. "Been getting along fine taking my meals alone for years." "Perhaps I'm tired of doing the same," Kathleen replied honestly. "Besides, I owe you for your assistance today. You don't owe me anything." His voice was gruff, but there was a gentleness to it that belied his harsh appearance. Their food arrived, temporarily halting conversation. As they ate, Kathleen found herself studying Landry covertly. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, suggesting he was older than she had first thought, perhaps in his early 30s. His hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who had known hard work and harder fights, yet they handled the cutlery with unexpected grace. "How long will you stay in Silver Creek?" she asked, breaking the silence. He shrugged. "Hard to say. I go where the work takes me." "And is there work here for you now?" "Not at present. But there's word of a gang operating out of the mountains to the north. Might be worth investigating." Kathleen frowned. "Sounds dangerous." "It's what I do." He met her gaze steadily. "Does that trouble you?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never known anyone in your line of work before. Most people haven't." He set down his spoon, his stew half finished. "It's not a profession that lends itself to polite company. And yet here we are, having a perfectly civil lunch," she pointed out with a small smile. He returned the smile, a rare sight that transformed his face entirely. "So we are, though I suspect Mrs. Henson will have plenty to say about it to the ladies' auxiliary." "Let her," Kathleen said with sudden defiance. "I'm tired of having my every move scrutinized and judged. In Boston, at least I knew the rules. Here, it seems they change depending on who's watching." "That's the frontier for you," Landry said. "People make up the rules as they go along. It's both the best and worst thing about it." They finished their meal in companionable silence. When the check came, Landry insisted on paying, brushing aside Kathleen's protests. "Next time can be your treat," he said, then looked surprised at his own presumption. Kathleen found she liked the idea of a next time, which was dangerous thinking indeed. Outside the hotel, they paused, the awkwardness of new acquaintances settling over them. "May I walk you home?" Landry asked. "Thank you, but I have some errands to run," she lied, suddenly needing space to process the unexpected turn her day had taken. He nodded, seeming to understand. "Another time, then. Good day, Miss Kennedy." "Good day, Mr. Landry." She watched him stride away, his tall figure commanding attention even in a town accustomed to hard men. The following week brought heavy rain, turning Silver Creek's dirt streets into rivers of mud. Kathleen's students arrived at school drenched and muddy, tracking in enough soil to plant a garden. She didn't mind. The schoolroom could be cleaned, and the children's enthusiasm for learning remained undampened by the weather. On Wednesday afternoon, as the rain continued to pour, Kathleen dismissed her students early, concerned about the rising creek that gave the town its name. She was securing the windows against the storm when the door opened, admitting a gust of wind and rain along with Grant Landry. "Mr. Landry," she exclaimed, startled by his sudden appearance. "What brings you out in this deluge?" He removed his hat, water streaming from its brim onto the floor. "Came to check on you. Creek's rising fast. Sheriff's concerned about flooding." Kathleen glanced out the window at the angry gray sky. "Is there danger?" "Not yet, but best to be prepared. You have somewhere to go if the schoolhouse floods. It's sitting pretty low." She hadn't considered that possibility. No, I suppose the hotel. My cabin's on higher ground," he said, then quickly added, "Not suggesting you stay with me, just offering to help move your valuables if need be." Kathleen appreciated both the offer and his clarification. "Thank you. I don't have much, but there are the school records and books to consider." They spent the next hour moving the most important items to higher shelves and securing what couldn't be moved. As they worked, Kathleen found herself relaxing in Landry's presence. There was something comforting about his quiet competence, his matter-of-fact approach to potential disaster. "How did you know to come check on me?" she asked as they finished. "Asked myself who might need help and might be too proud to ask for it," he replied with a knowing look. She laughed, surprised by his insight. "Am I that transparent?" independent women often are to those paying attention. The rain continued to beat against the windows, but the immediate task was done. Kathleen made coffee on her small stove, and they sat at her table, steam rising from their cups. "Tell me about Boston," Landry said, his fingers curled around the mug for warmth. Kathleen described her life there, the elegant brownstone where she'd grown up, the music lessons and literary salons, the bustling harbor and tree-lined commons. As she spoke, she realized how much she missed the city's refinements, even as she was coming to appreciate the raw beauty of the West. "Sounds like a different world," Landry commented when she finished. "What made you leave it behind?" The question touched on memories Kathleen usually avoided. She considered deflecting, but found herself wanting to share the truth with this man who had already seen her at her most vulnerable. "My father was a banker," she began. "He made some unwise investments. When the panic hit in '73, he lost everything. The shock was too much for his heart. He died leaving nothing but debts." "I'm sorry," Landry said softly. "That's a heavy burden for a young woman to bear." "I had few options. Teaching was one of the only respectable professions open to me, and positions in Boston were scarce. When my cousin wrote about the need for a teacher here, it seemed like providence." "Do you regret coming?" Kathleen considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "Despite everything, no. There's a freedom here I never knew in Boston, and the children. They're so eager to learn, so unaffected by the social constraints I grew up with." Landry nodded, understanding in his eyes. The West has a way of stripping away pretenses, for better or worse. "What about you?" she asked, turning the conversation. "What brought you to this life?" A shadow crossed his face, and for a moment she thought he might not answer. "The war," he said eventually, "changes a man, seeing what men can do to each other. After, I couldn't settle back into ordinary life. Tried ranching for a while, but trouble has a way of finding me. Figured I might as well make use of my particular skills. Skills at tracking and dealing with dangerous men," Kathleen said, choosing her words carefully. "Yes." His gaze was steady. "I'm good at violence, Miss Kennedy. Not something I'm proud of, but it's the truth. Yet you use it to bring criminals to justice. Some would say I am the criminal judge, jury, and executioner all in one. Is that how you see yourself?" He considered this. "No. I see myself as necessary. In a land with too few lawmen and too many outlaws, someone has to stand in the gap." The rain was letting up, the drumming on the roof fading to a gentle patter. Landry rose, setting down his empty cup. "I should go. Doesn't look like the creek will flood after all." Kathleen walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. "Thank you for your help today, and for the company." He smiled, that rare transformation of his features that made her heart beat faster. "My pleasure, Miss Kennedy." "Kathleen," she said impulsively. "Please call me Kathleen." He hesitated, then nodded. "Kathleen," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "And I'm Grant." "Grant," she echoed. "Thank you again." He placed his hat on his head, tipping it slightly. "Until next time." As she watched him walk away, disappearing into the misty aftermath of the storm, Kathleen acknowledged the dangerous truth she had been avoiding. She was attracted to Grant Landry, a man whose life and values were worlds apart from everything she had known. The next few weeks brought an unexpected shift in Kathleen's life in Silver Creek. Grant Landry, once a figure of fear, became a regular presence. He would appear at the schoolhouse after classes, offering to walk her home or inviting her for coffee at the hotel restaurant. Sometimes they would simply sit on the schoolhouse porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. Their growing friendship did not go unnoticed. Kathleen was aware of the whispers that followed her, the speculative glances from the townspeople. She tried not to care, but years of social conditioning were hard to overcome. "They're talking about us," she said one evening as they walked along the creek, now safely back within its banks after the rainstorm. Grant nodded, unsurprised. "Does it bother you?" "It shouldn't," she admitted. "But it does, a little. I'm supposed to be setting an example for my students, and being seen with me sets a bad example." There was no accusation in his tone, merely curiosity. "No, that's not what I meant." She stopped walking, turning to face him. "It's not you specifically, it's any man. An unmarried teacher is expected to be above reproach. Socializing with a single man, unchaperoned, it raises eyebrows." "Eastern sensibilities," he said with a small smile. "Out here, folks are generally more practical. They're more concerned with whether you can teach their children to read than with who you walk with in the evenings." "I hope you're right." She resumed walking, her hand brushing against his accidentally. The brief contact sent a jolt of awareness through her. "Besides," Grant added, "if anyone has a reputation to worry about, it's me. Being seen with the respectable schoolteacher might actually improve mine." This made her laugh, easing the tension. "Is that why you seek my company? To rehabilitate your standing in the community?" His expression sobered. "No, Kathleen, that's not why." The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Kathleen felt her cheeks warm and was grateful for the gathering dusk that hid her blush. They continued their walk in silence, both aware that something had shifted between them. When they reached the schoolhouse, Grant paused at the bottom of the steps. "I'll be riding out tomorrow," he said. "Got word of a job up north." Kathleen felt a pang of disappointment. "How long will you be gone?" "Hard to say. A week, maybe longer," she nodded, trying to hide her concern. "Be careful, always am." He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek with calloused fingers. "I'll come see you when I return." The gesture was over almost before it began, but Kathleen felt the imprint of his touch long after he had disappeared into the night. True to his word, Grant was gone for over a week. Kathleen threw herself into her teaching, introducing new lessons and organizing a small pageant for the town. Yet she found her thoughts straying often to the bounty hunter, wondering where he was, if he was safe, when he might return. She was correcting arithmetic exercises one evening when a knock at the schoolhouse door startled her. Her heart leapt, thinking it might be Grant, but when she opened the door, it was Sheriff Taylor who stood there, his expression grim. "Evening, Miss Kennedy," he said, twisting his hat in his hands. "Sorry to disturb you." "Not at all, Sheriff. Is something wrong?" He hesitated. "It's Landry. He's back in town, but he's been hurt. Pretty bad." Kathleen felt the blood drain from her face. "How bad? Where is he?" "Doc Bennett's got him at the clinic. Took a bullet in the side, lost a lot of blood before he made it back to town." Without a word, Kathleen grabbed her shawl and hurried past the sheriff, who had to quicken his pace to keep up with her. The town's small medical clinic was on the other side of Main Street, a modest building where Dr. Bennett treated everything from childbirth to gunshot wounds. When she burst through the door, Dr. Bennett looked up from his desk, surprise crossing his weathered face. "Miss Kennedy." "Where is he?" she demanded, all pretense of propriety forgotten. Dr. Bennett nodded toward a door at the back. In there. He's stable for now, but he's not out of the woods. The bullet nicked his liver. I've done what I can, but infection is the real danger now. Kathleen pushed past him into the small room that served as the clinic's surgical ward. Grant lay on a narrow bed, his face ashen against the white pillowcase. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, a bandage visible beneath the thin sheet covering him. She approached slowly, afraid of what she might find. His eyes were closed, his features slack in unconsciousness. She had never seen him look so vulnerable, this man who had always seemed invincible to her. "Oh, Grant," she whispered, sinking into a chair beside the bed. She reached for his hand, which lay limp on the sheet. It was warm, at least, a reassuring sign of life. Dr. Bennett entered quietly. "He was asking for you before the laudanum took effect." This simple statement brought tears to Kathleen's eyes. "What happened?" "From what I gathered, he tracked his quarry to an abandoned mining camp. There were more men than he expected. Got the drop on him." "Will he recover?" The doctor sighed. "If infection doesn't set in, yes, but that's a big if with gunshot wounds. Next 48 hours will be critical." "I'll stay with him," Kathleen said firmly. Dr. Bennett raised an eyebrow. "Miss Kennedy, that would hardly be appropriate." "Think of your reputation." "I don't care about my reputation," she interrupted. "He has no one else. I'm staying." The doctor studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Very well. I'll have Mrs. Bennett bring you some blankets. The chair isn't comfortable, but it's all I can offer." "Thank you." After he left, Kathleen continued to hold Grant's hand, her thumb tracing small circles on his palm. "You have to fight, Grant," she murmured. "Do you hear me? You have to fight." She stayed through the night, dozing fitfully in the hard wooden chair. Dr. Bennett checked on Grant periodically, changing his bandages and administering more laudanum when he showed signs of pain. By morning, fever had set in, and Grant began to thrash and mumble in his delirium. "Hold him down," Dr. Bennett instructed as he tried to change the dressing on Grant's wound. "We can't have him tearing these stitches." Kathleen pressed her weight against Grant's shoulders, horrified by the heat radiating from his skin. "He's burning up," she said anxiously. "The infection's taking hold," the doctor confirmed grimly. "I'm going to try a poultice of golden seal. It's worked before." Throughout the day, Kathleen bathed Grant's face with cool water, trying to bring down his fever. She spoke to him constantly, not knowing if he could hear her but needing to give him something to anchor to in his fevered state. "You remember when we walked by the creek?" she said softly. "The water was so clear, and you told me about the fish you used to catch as a boy in Missouri. You promised to take me fishing someday. I'm holding you to that promise, Grant Landry, so you need to get better." In his delirium, Grant called out names she didn't recognize, comrades from the war, perhaps, or family members long gone. Sometimes he seemed to be reliving battles, his hands clenching as if reaching for weapons that weren't there. By evening, his condition had worsened. Dr. Bennett's face was grave as he examined the wound. "The infection's spreading. I've seen men die from less." Kathleen refused to accept this. "There must be something more we can do." "Prayer wouldn't hurt," the doctor said, not unkindly. "Beyond that, it's up to his constitution and God's will." That night, as Grant's fever peaked, Kathleen did pray fervently, desperately. She had never been particularly religious, but now she found herself bargaining with a God she wasn't sure she believed in. "Please," she whispered, her forehead pressed against Grant's burning hand. "Please don't take him. I think I'm falling in love with him." The admission, spoken aloud for the first time, even if only to an unconscious man and whatever deities might be listening, shocked her with its truth. Somewhere along the way, her fear of this dangerous man had transformed into something deeper, more profound. As midnight approached, Grant's thrashing suddenly stopped. For one terrifying moment, Kathleen thought he had died. She leapt to her feet, searching frantically for signs of life. Then she saw it, his chest still rose and fell, but more evenly now. She placed a hand on his forehead. The burning heat had diminished. "Dr. Bennett," she called, her voice breaking with hope and fear intermingled. The doctor appeared quickly, as if he had been waiting nearby. He examined Grant thoroughly, checking his pulse and the wound. "The fever's breaking," he said finally, a note of surprise in his voice. "It appears your prayers were heard, Miss Kennedy." Tears of relief streamed down Kathleen's face. She sank back into her chair, exhaustion washing over her now that the immediate danger had passed. "You should get some rest," Dr. Bennett advised. "Go home. I'll send word if there's any change." But Kathleen shook her head. "I'm staying until he wakes up." The doctor didn't argue this time, merely nodded and left them alone. Grant slept peacefully through the night and into the next day. Kathleen dozed intermittently, jerking awake at every small sound or movement from the bed. It was late afternoon when Grant's eyes finally fluttered open, focusing with effort on the ceiling above him. "Grant," Kathleen said softly, leaning forward. He turned his head slowly, his gaze finding hers. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by confusion. "Kathleen, where?" "You're at Dr. Bennett's clinic," she explained, taking his hand again. "You were shot, do you remember?" He frowned, trying to piece together memories. "Ambush at the old Walker mine. 3 men. I got 2, but the third." He winced, his hand moving instinctively to his side. "Don't try to move," she cautioned. "You've been very ill. The bullet infected your wound." Grant's eyes never left her face. "How long have you been here since they brought you in?" 2 days now." He looked stunned. "You've been here the whole time?" Kathleen nodded, suddenly self-conscious. She knew her hair was a mess, her dress wrinkled from being slept in. "I couldn't leave you." Grant's hand tightened around hers. "Thank you," he said simply, but his eyes conveyed much more. Dr. Bennett entered, smiling when he saw his patient awake. "Well, well. Look, who's decided to rejoin the land of the living." He conducted a thorough examination, declaring that the worst was over, but that Grant would need to remain at the clinic for at least another week to regain his strength. "And no bounty hunting for at least a month after that," the doctor added sternly. "That wound needs time to heal properly." Grant didn't argue, which told Kathleen how weak he truly felt. When the doctor left, she leaned in closer. "You scared me," she admitted. "Sorry about that." His voice was still hoarse, but there was a touch of his usual dry humor in it. "Not part of my plan." "And what was your plan?" "Catch the bad guys, collect the bounty, come back and take the schoolteacher fishing." He attempted a smile, which turned into a grimace of pain. Kathleen's heart swelled at his words. "That plan is still on the table, just delayed a bit." His expression sobered. "You should go home, get some proper rest. I'm not going anywhere, promise, promise." Reluctantly, Kathleen agreed to return to the schoolhouse. She had been absent from her teaching duties for 2 days, though she'd sent word explaining the circumstances. The school board had been understanding, arranging for the minister's wife to substitute in her absence. Before she left, she leaned down and, in a moment of boldness, pressed a gentle kiss to Grant's forehead. "I'll be back tomorrow," she promised. His eyes, warm with an emotion she dared not name, followed her to the door. "I'll be counting the hours," he said softly. The next week established a new routine. Kathleen taught her classes during the day, then spent her evenings at the clinic with Grant. She brought books to read aloud, chess games to play, and news of the town to share. As Grant's strength returned, their conversations deepened, venturing into territory they had previously avoided. Why did you really become a bounty hunter? Kathleen asked one evening as they sat playing chess on a board balanced across his lap. Grant considered the question, moving his knight thoughtfully. After the war, I drifted for a while, tried ranching in Kansas, but the memories, they followed me, nightmares mostly. Kathleen moved her bishop, capturing one of his pawns. Of the battles, some. But mostly of the men I couldn't save. He stared at the chessboard without seeing it. I was a captain by the end, had men under my command. Boys, really. Some didn't make it home. That wasn't your fault, she said gently. Maybe not, but it was my responsibility. He refocused on the game, moving his queen with deliberate precision. Check. Kathleen studied the board, buying time to process what he had shared. So how did that lead to bounty hunting? I was in a saloon in Dodge City. Saw a wanted poster for a man. I recognized a deserter who'd left his post during a battle, costing 3 men their lives. The bounty was substantial. I tracked him down, brought him in. Grant's voice was matter of fact, but his eyes were distant. Realized I was good at it, and there was a satisfaction in bringing men like that to justice. Is it always about justice? Kathleen asked, moving her king out of danger. Grant met her gaze. For me, yes. I don't take contracts on men who don't deserve what's coming to them. Check again. She frowned at the board, seeing her position deteriorating. And what about after? Have you thought about what comes next? After what? After bounty hunting. You can't do it forever. He was silent for a long moment. Never gave it much thought. Always figured I'd die with my boots on someday. The casual acceptance of his own mortality chilled Kathleen. That's a bleak outlook. It's a realistic one in my line of work. He captured her bishop with a decisive move. Checkmate. Kathleen stared at the board, seeing that he was right. Her king was trapped. You win, she conceded. This time. He set the board aside. But you're getting better. Nearly had me worried there for a minute. She smiled, but her mind was still on their conversation. Grant, I want you to promise me something. That depends on what it is. Promise me you'll start thinking about a different future, one that doesn't end with you dying violently in some God-forsaken place. He studied her face, his expression softening. Why does it matter to you? The question hung between them, demanding an honesty Kathleen wasn't sure she was ready to give. But nearly losing him had taught her the value of truth spoken in its time. Because I care about you, she said simply. More than I should, perhaps. More than is wise. Grant's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. Nothing wise about caring for a man like me. I've never claimed to be particularly wise, she replied with a small smile. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I promise to think about it. That's all I can offer right now. It was enough for the moment. By the following week, Dr. Bennett declared Grant well enough to leave the clinic, though he sternly reiterated his instructions about taking it easy. Since Grant's rented room at the boarding house had been given to another tenant during his absence, Kathleen made arrangements for him to stay in a small cabin on the edge of town that belonged to one of her students' families. The Hendersons were away visiting relatives in Denver and had agreed to let Grant use the cabin until they returned. The day of his release, Kathleen arrived at the clinic to find Grant already dressed and sitting on the edge of the bed, looking pale but determined, ready to escape. She asked lightly. He nodded, rising carefully to his feet. More than ready. No offense to Doc Bennett, but I've had my fill of this place. She could see he was still weak, though he tried to hide it. I've brought a wagon, no arguments. To her surprise, he didn't protest. Lead the way, schoolmarm. The Henderson cabin was simple but comfortable, with a small porch overlooking a meadow that stretched toward the distant mountains. Inside, there was a main room with a stone fireplace, a tiny kitchen area, and a bedroom just big enough for a bed and chest of drawers. Kathleen had spent the previous evening cleaning it and stocking the pantry with basic supplies. Grant stood in the middle of the main room, taking it all in. "This is more than I'm used to," he admitted. "Usually it's hotel rooms or sleeping rough on the trail." "Well, you have at least 3 weeks to enjoy it, according to Dr. Bennett. The Hendersons won't be back until then." He moved to the window, looking out at the view. "Could get used to this. Peaceful." Kathleen joined him, standing close enough that their arms brushed. "Silver Creek has its charms." "It does indeed." His gaze shifted to her face, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. She stepped back, suddenly nervous. "I should go. Let you rest. I've made a stew, it's on the stove, just needs heating." Grant caught her hand before she could retreat further. "Stay, just for a while." She hesitated, aware of the impropriety of being alone with him in a cabin, aware also that she no longer cared about such things. "All right, for a little while." They sat on the porch, watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains. The late afternoon light painted everything in gold, from the swaying grasses to the weathered boards beneath their feet. "Tell me something about you that I don't know," Grant said, breaking a comfortable silence. Kathleen considered the request. "I used to sing in Boston. I was quite good, actually. My father wanted me to pursue it professionally, but my mother thought it unseemly." "Would you sing for me sometime?" She smiled, touched by his interest. "Perhaps, when you're stronger. What about you?" "Tell me something I don't know about Grant Landry." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "I have a brother," he said finally. "Younger. Lives in St. Louis with his wife and children. We haven't spoken in years." "Why not?" "He didn't approve of my choices after the war. Wanted me to come work for him in his law practice. When I refused, he said I was dishonoring our family name." Grant's voice was neutral, but Kathleen could hear the old hurt beneath it. "You miss him?" "Sometimes. Miss knowing my nieces and nephews more, though. My brother sends newspaper clippings about them occasionally. School achievements, that sort of thing." "You could write to him," Kathleen suggested gently. Grant shook his head. "Too much water under that bridge. Besides, he's better off without the association. A respectable attorney doesn't need a bounty hunter for a brother." The sun was touching the mountains now, the sky blazing with color. Kathleen was about to suggest they go inside when Grant spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the future." She turned to him, surprised. "And I've saved most of what I've earned over the years, enough to buy a small spread, maybe, raise horses." He looked at her, vulnerability in his gaze. "If I had a reason to settle down." The implication was clear, and Kathleen's heart raced. "Are you asking if you have a reason, Grant?" "I'm asking if I could have one. Someday." His voice was steady, but she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Instead of answering with words, Kathleen leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as Grant's hand came up to cup her cheek. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Is that answer enough?" she whispered. His smile was slow and warm. "For now." The following weeks were a revelation for Kathleen. She continued her teaching duties during the day, but her evenings belonged to Grant. They were careful to maintain propriety in public. Silver Creek might be more forgiving than Boston, but it still had its standards. But their private moments in the cabin were filled with deepening intimacy. Grant's recovery progressed steadily. By the 3rd week, he was able to take short rides on a horse borrowed from the livery stable. Sometimes Kathleen accompanied him on weekend excursions, riding double, her arms wrapped around his waist as they explored the countryside around Silver Creek. During one such ride, they discovered a hidden valley nestled between rolling hills, with a small creek running through it and cottonwood trees providing shade along its banks. "It's beautiful," Kathleen said as they dismounted to rest the horse. Like something from a painting. Grant surveyed the valley with a critical eye. Good grazing land, water source, protected from the worst of the winter winds by these hills. He turned to her, a question in his eyes. "What do you think?" She understood immediately. "For your horse ranch," he nodded. "Land around here is still cheap. Government's practically giving it away to settlers." "I think it's perfect," she said honestly. They sat by the creek, their shoulders touching, as Grant outlined his vision for the future: a modest house, stables, pastures for breeding and training horses. As he spoke, Kathleen could see it coming to life in her mind's eye. A home, their home, built on this peaceful spot. "Would you be happy here?" Grant asked finally. "It's a far cry from Boston." Kathleen looked around at the wild beauty of the landscape. "Boston is my past, this." She gestured to the valley to him. "This could be my future." The look he gave her was full of such naked hope that it brought tears to her eyes. Without words, they sealed the promise with a kiss that spoke of tomorrow. The Henderson family was due to return in a few days, which meant Grant would need to find new accommodations. He had been considering a room at the boarding house again, but Kathleen sensed he was reluctant to return to such close quarters with others. "I've been looking at the land office records," he told her one evening as they sat before the fireplace. "That valley we found, it's unclaimed. I could file a homestead application." Kathleen set down her book. "You're serious about this?" "I am." He reached for her hand. "I'm done with bounty hunting, Kathleen. I want something different now, something more." "What about the cabin? Building would take time." "There's a line shack on the property. Nothing fancy, but it would do until I could build proper." She could hear the determination in his voice, see the certainty in his eyes. This wasn't a whim. It was a decision he had been moving toward for some time. "When would you file the claim?" "Tomorrow, if the land agent is in town. No sense waiting." Kathleen nodded slowly, her mind racing ahead to all the implications. "And us? What happens with us, Grant?" He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "That depends on you. I know what I want, but I won't presume to speak for your feelings." "I think you know my feelings," she said softly. "I want to hear them." She took a deep breath. "I love you, Grant Landry. I think I have since that day you came to apologize for frightening me." His face transformed with joy. "And I love you, Kathleen Kennedy, more than I ever thought possible." He slipped from the chair to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "I don't have a ring yet, this wasn't planned, but I can't wait another day to ask. Will you marry me? Be my wife, my partner in whatever comes." Tears spilled down Kathleen's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Grant rose, pulling her up with him and into his arms. Their kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The next morning they rode into town together, parting at the schoolhouse with a discreet touch of hands. Grant continued on to the land office while Kathleen prepared for her day of teaching. She found it nearly impossible to concentrate, her mind constantly drifting to the future that was taking shape before her. By noon, it was done. Grant met her for lunch at the hotel restaurant, where he slid a folded document across the table to her with barely contained excitement. "It's official," he said as she opened the homestead application, approved and stamped by the land agent. 160 acres, including our valley. "We have 5 years to prove up the claim by building a dwelling and cultivating the land." Kathleen traced the boundaries drawn on the attached map. "It's really happening. There's more." Grant reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box, found something at the jeweler's. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "It's not fancy," he apologized, "but it's honest, like what I feel for you." "It's beautiful," she said truthfully, extending her hand so he could slip it onto her finger. The weight of it felt right, a tangible symbol of their commitment. Over lunch, they discussed their plans. Grant would move to the line shack immediately and begin preparations for building a proper house. They would marry as soon as arrangements could be made, a simple ceremony with the town's minister. "What about your teaching?" Grant asked. "The homestead is a fair ride from town." Kathleen had been pondering this. "I'll finish out the school term. It's only 6 more weeks. After that, we can decide. Perhaps I could teach part-time or tutor children from nearby farms." He nodded, relieved she had given it thought. "We'll make it work, whatever you decide." Word of their engagement spread quickly through Silver Creek. To Kathleen's surprise, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Her students were excited, the parents supportive. Even the ladies who had initially been most critical of her seemed to approve of the match. "They're just happy to see the notorious bounty hunter settling down," Grant joked when she expressed her surprise. "Makes them feel safer." "And what does Sheriff Taylor think of your career change?" Kathleen asked. "Offered to deputize me if I ever get bored with ranching." Grant grinned. "Told him I'd think about it. Part-time, maybe, once we're established." The next weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Grant split his time between working on the homestead and helping Kathleen plan their wedding. They decided on a June ceremony, after the school term ended, which gave them just enough time to prepare. The line shack proved to be more primitive than Grant had let on, little more than a one-room shelter with a leaky roof and dirt floor. He spent long days making it habitable, determined that it would be ready for Kathleen to visit, if not yet to live in. One Saturday, with school dismissed for the day, he took her to see his progress. The transformation was remarkable. The roof had been repaired, the floor covered with rough-hewn planks. A stone fireplace had been rebuilt in one corner and basic furniture, a bed, a table, 2 chairs had been crafted or purchased. "It's still humble," Grant said, watching her reaction anxiously. "But it's clean and sound. The house will be better. I've already drawn up plans." Kathleen walked the small space, touching the walls, the sturdy table. She could feel the care that had gone into each repair, each improvement. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. "Our first home." Relief washed over his face. "You're not disappointed. How could I be?" She moved to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "I would live in a tent if it meant being with you." Their wedding day dawned clear and warm, a perfect June morning. The ceremony was held in the town's small church, filled to capacity with well-wishers. Kathleen wore a simple cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Grant waited for her at the altar, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him, even when facing armed outlaws. When she appeared at the back of the church, his expression transformed into one of such pure joy that it brought tears to her eyes. The service was brief but meaningful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises to love, honor, and cherish through whatever life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the congregation nearly raised the roof. The celebration continued at the town hall, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every family in Silver Creek. There was dancing, laughter, and so many well wishes that Kathleen lost track. Through it all, Grant remained at her side, his hand often seeking hers, as if to reassure himself that this happiness was real. As the sun began to set, they slipped away, riding double on Grant's horse toward their homestead. The valley was bathed in golden light when they arrived, the lined shack transformed by Kathleen's feminine touches, curtains at the windows, a quilt on the bed, wildflowers in a jar on the table. "Welcome home, Mrs. Landry," Grant said as he lifted her down from the horse. "I like the sound of that," she replied, smiling up at him. He swept her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold with exaggerated care. Inside, he set her gently on her feet, his hands lingering at her waist. "Are you happy, truly?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. Kathleen reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." "Are you?" His answer was to kiss her, a kiss that spoke of love, of promise, of a future stretching before them like the endless prairie. Later, as they lay entwined in the narrow bed, watching the stars through the small window, Grant whispered, "I'm glad you found the courage to come out from behind that curtain." Kathleen smiled, remembering her fear the first time she had seen him, how far they had come from that moment. "And I'm glad you had the patience to wait for me." "I would have waited forever," he said simply. "Fortunately," she replied, nestling closer to him, "you didn't have to." Outside, the night was alive with sounds: the rustle of wind through grass, the distant call of a coyote, the gentle murmur of the creek. Inside their small shelter, Grant and Kathleen Landry slept in each other's arms, their dreams no longer separate but shared. The years that followed fulfilled the promise of that first night. Grant built their house with his own hands, a sturdy structure of logs and stone that expanded as their family grew. Kathleen established a small school on their property, teaching not only their own children but those of neighboring homesteaders. The horse ranch prospered, Grant's skill with animals and fair business practices earning him respect throughout the territory. Occasionally, he would ride with the sheriff when dangerous work needed doing, but more often he was content to stay close to home, watching over what he valued most. Silver Creek grew from a rough frontier town into a thriving community. The railroad came, bringing prosperity and progress. Through it all, the Landry homestead remained a constant, a place of warmth, love, and courage. On their 20th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard that had once been wild prairie, Kathleen reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "You ever miss it?" she asked. "The excitement of your former life?" Grant's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Not for a minute. Everything I want is right here." And as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the valley in the same golden light that had welcomed them on their wedding day, Kathleen knew it was true. The frightened woman who had hidden behind a curtain was long gone, replaced by one who had learned that true courage came not from facing danger, but from embracing love. For Grant and Kathleen Landry, that was the greatest adventure of all.